It's from the movie In the Name of the Father, which is with Daniel Day-Lewis. It was 1975. He's an Irish actor, famous, Academy Award winning. And in this role, he and his friend are Irish youths having a good time. It's circa 1960s, I guess, or early 70s. I don't know. But present time for the actors, more or less. 1971, I think the events occurred where there was the IRA had bombed or sent bombers to London. These two Irish boys, 20 or 22-year-old whatevers, are going to England to get away from Ireland because the Daniel Day-Lewis character had been arrested and or not arrested, but kind of gotten in trouble with the locals and with the police because the British were what's the word? They had invaded basically Ireland to defend the realm against the Irish rebellions and rebellious basically keeping the Irish all under guard in their own country, which is what the Irish were complaining about. So when Daniel Day-Lewis's character is in London, they're partying with the hippie factions and free spirits. They had a house there, and then they were kind of actually the two Irish boys were taken away from their places that they had to stay, kicked out, and they were on the street the night that the bombing occurred, and fairly near where it had occurred at evening, and they left and went back to England, but they were arrested on their way back to England, rather, and accused of the murders of innocents, which occurred. The bombing wasn't meant to do that, but it did. And they had associates who were connected. And even though they were not any part of any of this, they were arrested. And then also the family of the Daniel Day-Lewis character, the father, was arrested, even though he was in Ireland at the time of the bombings. And they were all convicted of 30-year to life sentences, despite, and they were forced into doing it's going on a little long, but they were made to give confessions as well, forced to, tortured, basically. And so the Daniel Day-Lewis character is in the prison with the father, and there is an IRA, that's what they call the rebellious army, Irish Rebellion Army. And this guy is now also in the prison, and he tells them that he also told the police that he's the one that did the bombings. So there was a lot of tension in the jail, and the Daniel Day-Lewis character is then goes to an interview with a reporter slash lawyer. I can't say exactly what her position was, but she was entrusted to inform him and talk with him to see if they could do anything. And the Daniel Day-Lewis character did not trust this lawyer, even though her intentions were of goodwill. And this was something similar to what Kevin's story has presented. So the Irish character refuses the help at the point I am in the movie, and says to her, "I don't trust you, and I don't trust anything English, and that includes the language." The language being spoken, the shared words. He says, "I don't know what any of those words mean. Mercy, larceny, literacy, illiteracy." And I don't have the exact quotes of all the words, but those generally, this kind of terminology where he says, "I don't believe that. I don't trust any of that. And I don't trust you that you're going to be able to help me," even though he knows that the Irish thief and murderer was telling the truth, or presenting it to the different parties that needed to know, especially the police, who would refuse to acknowledge that they tortured the prisoners and that they were guilty of falsifying the evidence and not revealing the truth, because they wanted some scapegoats. Goats. And so that's the basic part of the movie. Eventually, of course, he's going to get released and so forth. And but the father is going to die in prison, I believe. And of course, the thing that results here is that even though they get released, that they still will never, ever trust the system or the working authorities at any level. Generally, that they'll have to trust them in terms of to survive and be among the Irish people and the English people, and go on with life, maybe without any more difficulties, in a sense, except for the whole thing is difficult because all the people are being enslaved and controlled and dominated, no matter what level they're playing at. And so this is a very revealing movie, and I get that it related. That's what I thought of when the story was come up right here with Kevin's adventures. So just to end with, in 1975, when the movie came out, they played at the beginning of the movie a very evocative piece of music by Jimi Hendrix called Voodoo Child. And in that song, I stand up next to a mountain, chop it down with the edge of my hand. And it's a powerful song with incredible electronic recording and lyrics and energies that were descriptive of the life of Jimi Hendrix, who had died in 70. That was just around the time that In the Name of the Fathers, the events of that movie occurred. And I, myself, was part of that sensibility. I left New York. I had been working in the city, in New York City, 74, 73, 74 for 2 years as a advertising executive. Well, not executive, but research assistant for advertising agency. It was a good job. And I lived in Manhattan in basically a cave, which was a whole floor of a building that we and my two friends shared. And that's where I really got introduced to the invisible forces and other avenues were related with all interrelated. The advertising medium and where I was living, my friend that in the apartment. It's actually an empty apartment. It's sorry, the name isn't coming to me of what they call those. And I built a little room building inside I built the room, and we all did our own private little spaces in the corners of the big space. It was by the World Trade Center. And the World Trade Center was just being built at the same time. I'm just putting it kind of all together myself here. So what happened, very unusual experience, I had a collection of baseball cards, a really good collection of baseball cards that could have been my retirement fund, actually. It was worth that much 30 years later. But I had it with me in the apartment, and it got stolen, and I think the landlord was the one who stole it. And I also acquired a picture of an Indian, that is Asian Indian, one of those spiritual pictures that's like Krishna or Vishnu or whatever. I think it was a Krishna-like, with a woman also, like the Kali or whatever the representations of king and queen, or a spiritual entity that the Indians had produced based on their own Rig Veda histories. And I had it in my room, and it also disappeared. So that's all interconnected. And when I left New York, my object was to get away from the material. I went to California and San Francisco, and I moved in and in an apartment there, and I started to study astrology. But I should back up and just finish with, when I was in New York, I was studying with a Japanese in my earlier times in New York, 72, and around the time of, just after In the Name of the Father, I started studying everything: spiritual, religious, metaphysical, educational, psychic, astronomical, et cetera, et cetera. And I was inhabiting myself with this constantly. I took also the spiritual meetings, we called them ES trainings, EST it was called. And that was in 74, 75. And that's what led me to departing from, I should say, I was with a Japanese friend who was a cook in New York City. I would visit with him and stay in his apartment. We would stay up all night listening to the spiritual music and talking about all this stuff, meditating. And that's my vehicle that got me to leave New York and California, and where I began to do whatever my own kind of, the work I was doing. I became an astrologer, and I studied with the astrology guys for a couple of years, or 1 year. But basically, same thing, start studying something and then take it out on your own. And that's kind of a template. That's what happened to me anyway. It's really not about establishing oneself in some kind of position that's authoritarian. And I avoided that. And I also avoided wanting to manipulate people with telling them readings that they weren't ingenuine. I just didn't do it for wanting to earn, to make money. So I'm going to, well, what happened was that I realized that I just realized all along that there was always more. So the object was not to teach something in a term that was going to make it in some form of, let's say, quasi-religious establishment, and an authoritarian economic vehicle, or any of that, although nothing wrong with that, and not saying it's good or bad or indifferent. So yeah, at the same time, um, I, I thank you very much, Val. I went on, and that's kind of the addendum to the story yesterday. So I appreciate it. I didn't think I was going to tell that part of it, but it's cool. In the Name of the Father, it's an excellent movie among a series of movies. And that's, I guess I will share this part, that there were about 10 movies in a series that I saw during my, let's say, 30 years since being a youth or so. Um, some movies were from the 30s, Lost Horizon, about Shangri-La, which was filmed in California in Ojai, and it's just a beautiful movie. And that was 1939. I'm thinking also I'll include The Wizard of Oz, and then later The Sound of Music, and even because it's such a good movie, Dr. Strangelove was in the 60s about the bomb, and the army guys creating it and then dropping it on Hiroshima. But it's really a comedy about all of this, and with Peter Sellers. Excellent. But there's a number of movies that are evocative of this theme of really trying to get free and clear, or becoming aware of and recognizing those themes. Lawrence of Arabia, for friends in Iran, because this was about the Englishman who comes to Iran and with the army, and involves himself in becoming an independent quasi-general, working with the Persian riders and armies, the desert, the desert people. And and he ends up going back to England, the hero, which is played by Peter O'Toole. I'm sorry, I'm really trying to keep this out of some kind of a personal thing. And then this all pops up. Peter Sellers, Peter O'Toole are the main actors in these movies. No accidents. Another one is The Greatest Story Ever Told, which is about Christ. And these are fantastically filmed movies. Dr. Zhivago, also from the 60s, about the Russian doctor who gets imprisoned or actually didn't get imprisoned. He escaped to the country, and it's a love story, blah, 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 very famous movie as well, by the director David Lean. Okay, so those are some of them. I have a list, but they follow this track. And the one that I followed that came up right around 1980 was The Field of Dreams, which is, or during the 80s, which is the movie about listening to the voices in the field, like the masters and or new guides. And I recognize the relationship directly with that movie, of course. And it was part of my own working with being part of that, but also the infiltration aspect, because they're all inclusive, and it's a very hard thing to recognize, because I'm thinking, well, this must be a confirmation of everything, and it's only another part of it. Emerald Forest is another one, and the Wizard, Alice in Wonderland type movies. And Wizard of Oz most definitely is part of that recognition. And what's interesting is a lot of these people who played these characters and actors had difficult times, or they were successful. Daniel Day-Lewis was Academy Award winner for Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, who also was killed immediately after doing whatever it was that he was imparted to do, or being part of the Civil War. He actually established taxation for the military industrial complex, duped into doing it, and at the same time had the so-called honor or position of freeing the slaves. But what really happened was the slaves were then authoritarianized, inculcated, and obfuscated into the system. They're given credit to be part of the system. Okay, now we're going to give you legal status to be a slave in our system. Basically speaking, the occurrence of that, and that's, yeah. So I put that together pretty good. I got almost all of the movies on the list. Fly Away Home is another one. It's about the young girl who gets on whose father has a glider plane, and she flies with the geese south for the winter, because the geese are bonded with her. They got kind of caught where they were, and they weren't able to find their way home. And it's a great movie, really fun. And I recommend it. I have another association. I mean, the associations are all over the place as these symbologies that are reflective of what's really going on. And I would say in my life, I could identify with all of these things in all these different forms of interrelations. But the key is that we all will, if we take a look at it, or find in our own references, not the references I gave, but our observations of what we've seen, or what we've seen in movies, or what we've seen or heard, and also that voice as it's speaking, which is always available, and hearing it is the challenge, and also the presentation of our activity, how much intention we have, and then the picture of our own position, our own universal position, will get much bigger. And part of it is having to be truthful, and difficulty is also that we have to kind of acknowledge the limitations that we've allowed, but live with them as well, just as Kevin's character was talking about, having to go into the group as if accepting in order to get a vehicle or make contact with a vehicle who may, who knows, appear in some way, and probably will. In other words, it looks like we have some representation of expectation on that. And so, thanks, Val. I'm going to shut up and appreciate it very much.
It's like an audiobook you're reading. That's good. Thank you.
Hey, just could say
go
before
ahead.
we move,
Yeah.
I'm calling them e-box. And I really think, that's what Kevin, what we're all doing. We are creating e-box. They're not necessarily audio books, but I mean, I think it's almost could be said to be a new, a way of presenting or saying what they are that would totally differentiate it from anything else. And just a term that came to me, EBOK. Thanks, Val. All right.
Thanks, Peter. It's good.